Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you all? See, everybody's moved back here, so I'm going to move back here too. You know, I guess I'll just warn you, we kind of see this as more of an organic time for us to have a conversation about different factors that are entering into choosing a textbook. I can tell you right now what I do know. Well, let me ask a question, and then I'll tell you who we are and why we shouldn't be here. But how many of you like textbooks?
Not an overwhelming
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the three of us who are here to organize and sort of bring you some ideas about that would win the contest of not liking textbooks. And that would be me. I'm Larry Froelich. I teach A&P here on the Prescott campus. And Ellen Savoini is my colleague here on the Prescott campus who also teaches mostly A&P. In fact, A&P Ellen, I think. And then Matt Piercy is our colleague on the Verde campus who also teaches mostly A&P, but probably more other classes than any of us. And, you know, I was just thinking about it, you know, it's been interesting to just get this process going because we are, I think, all three of us very uninspired by our textbooks and by the process of choosing a textbook. And I think we may sit at the pinnacle in terms of how, in terms of being representative in the field of A&P of so many different inputs and conclusions, and none of them that seem to satisfy everyone. And it's not what, you know, in fact, Matt, when I wrote a description up for this workshop, the first thing he said was, "You make it look like we're going to decide on a textbook in this workshop." And I said, no, we'll never do that. You know?
Okay.
Believe it or not, it's not a simple problem that has a quick technological change, right? That we can make some bullet points and it's done. And last night, I was at Prescott College seeing this gentleman whose name is Rivera. While I was there, what I was thinking was, we should have brought him here and sent our speakers over there. And we were just talking about that this morning. It happens, it's so frequently, I think, that we're preaching to the choir in these workshops. And there's some value in that because sometimes we need to say the things and hear them to make, you know, and find out what we really think for ourselves, but to get a really different perspective. And the message that he brought to us is that when you have a complex problem, and, you know, I think choosing a textbook is so complex that it goes into the deepest problems we have in our society, and that's what he was talking about. When you have a problem like that, maybe rather than looking for that quick fix technological bullet point solution, what you do is you look for stories. You think about the tribe that you belong to and how you relate to those people, or the different tribes that we belong to, and you try and make a time when you can tell those stories. And he said the only way you come to a solution, absolutely the only way, is by listening deeply and carefully and doing it slowly. So I can tell you from the start, we can show you our situation in all its glory, I guess, and we'll do that. And we can talk about some quick and I think really interesting solutions. Matt has brought us a great one that I think, you know, is so obvious, and yet it's out there. We were just thinking about it. It's pretty new in terms of renting textbooks. But, you know, right from the start, nobody's jumping up and down about textbooks. And so the question is, in some way, and this might not even be true for all our courses, it might well be our outcome, which is to not even use a textbook. But on the other hand, more often than not, most of our courses have a textbook attached to them, which is often even the student's first experience with the academic content of that course, right? When they go and buy that book or get access to it, whether it's online or whatever. And so I thought we should maybe take a step back and think about what inspires us in our teaching. And maybe just at the start, before we even do anything else, take 10 minutes and tell those stories. And I have a story for you. I don't know if you want to, like, tell your stories to each other first, or you want me to tell you mine first?
You first.
Me first, okay.
Give us an example of stories.
What do you want to go?
I think what I'm thinking about and looking for, one story is about how I'd rather be a delivery person right now. That's how I brought all these, you know, that's how serious it is. We need a hand card to bring these texts down here.
Well, and students do, that's why they walk out like they're going on
Yeah.
a safari.
Yeah, I might have to carry 5 of these around with me, but they do. You know what? Yesterday in the intro session, we heard something, if you weren't here, it doesn't matter, but we heard about how can we get our students inspired because they come with all of these difficult personal, you know, issues or societal pressures or background or, you know, whether they're veterans, whether they're single moms and all of these kinds of things. And I think we have a whole 2-day-long workshop on that yesterday and today as well, right? From the nationally recognized person that I hear is excellent. However, at one point somebody said, you know, I think that if we are inspired by our discipline and we can show that to our students, then that's the first step towards a solution, towards getting them inspired in the classroom, right? And so I think that made me realize that when we look at a textbook, you know, we're looking for an organizational thing, but when I'm thinking about the story that you would tell about what inspired you, what is, all of us, I have to believe, if we're here right now, and I know that I think everybody here is a faculty member, and I guess we'll make you all introduce each other in a minute, I'm pretty sure. At this college, at some point in your life, something happened that made you go, wow, this is what is amazing about my discipline, right? An epiphany moment. It doesn't have to be, you know, like, oh, I was elevated up to the sky or anything like that. But, and so here, I'll tell you one for me. I was a recently entering graduate student at the University of Chicago, and I thought I knew my stuff, and I was inspired by evolutionary biology, by wanting to do my great research on amphibians and understanding their evolutionary pathways, and I'd taken courses in development. I was interested in all of this. And my advisor, who I had, you know, read his papers and stuff, said, well, the first thing you're going to do is take the medical student human anatomy course. And I did, you know, my brother's the doctor. I don't want anything to do with it. But that's what our graduate students do. And so I went into thinking this is going to be the most boring thing in the world. And you can have to imagine that didn't happen, because here I am, right, teaching anatomy here at this college. And the first day of class, my advisor did this. And this is what I do with my students the first day. He said, we're going to put together a human body in about 10 minutes. I'm going to do it for you folks in class, because I'm not going to give you all the details. But here's where we start. And everything he talked about, I already knew. We're starting from a blue and yellow line. Which represents what a human embryo would look like at about 7 days into human development. And we're actually looking at it as a cross-section or cutting across the embryo, because it's really 2 pancakes of cells. And so if you kind of draw this out in magic 3 dimensions, then you get something that looks like this. And these are supposed to be our little cells, just a nice, flat, single cell layer, sheet of cells. And this, by the way, would be something that's no bigger than that original unfertilized egg, because it hasn't grown at all, so you could barely see the whole thing. This is with its extra embryonic pieces, and we're at the size of a head of a pin. So this actual embryo you wouldn't be able to see except in a microscope. So you have one flat layer of cells sitting on top of another. Those are all my cells filling this thing in. And the first thing that happens is you form a brand new structure called a notochord, and it's a kind of fluid-filled rod that runs right down the middle of this thing right here, filled with fluid. And all these colors have meaning and had that meaning for about 100 years, symbolically by developmental biologists, for what we call the primary germ layers, or the first flat layers of cells that form in a human body. And this one's called the ectoderm. This one's called the endoderm. And green is always used for the notochord, and this is like a universal symbol, semiotics, or wait, what's the word? Semiotics or symbology that's used. And where we're going is we need to get from here to a tube within a tube, because that's the way our body is built. And so here's what happens. And it's as simple as this. And again, I'm not going to give you the full story would take a little bit longer. I'm just going to keep drawing that cross-section, but you have this ectoderm, and it starts to fold up on the sides like this, until eventually these meet here, and what's actually causing this to happen is the underlying notochord. So we have to imagine this still in 3 dimensions. Nothing's going on in the endoderm until eventually this rolling up ectoderm meets in the middle, and it actually rolls off a tube under there. So you get those 2 folds coming up, rolling off this tube. You've still got underlying notochord, and then you've got your endoderm here. And this tube that rolls off, that's running along the entire length of this structure, is called the neural tube. And now probably I got to a word that everybody is familiar with at this point. And the word neural refers to what? Nerves, right? The nervous system, a neurologist. And this neural tube goes on much later in development to form the brain and spinal cord. And so at this point in time, we've located the midline back or dorsal part of our body where our spinal cord, which eventually gets covered over by the vertebrae, or what some people will call the spine, or the bony vertebrae or vertebral column, is in place into adulthood. The next thing that happens, this thing gets stuffed up with a new layer of cells. That's why it has a new color. It's called the mesoderm. These cells divide off the ectoderm. They fill in there. Again, there will be just a short quiz on this later. And then happens what, there's a famous developmental biologist, Lewis Wolfart, who said is the most important event in your life. He said not marriage, not birth, not death, not any of those things, but it's called gastrulation. And this is at a point when, with my students, gastrulation, I'm always sure that I'm in new territory because nobody's heard of that word. Very rarely, sometimes you get somebody. And what happens is this whole 3-layer embryo, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, all rolls up into a tube. It's an extremely complicated process. The cells inside there are dividing and differentiating and moving, and we're just going to summarize it as the whole thing rolling up into a tube, so you get something that looks like this. The 2 ends of the ectoderm meet, right? So this comes around, and this comes around, and they meet. You've still got your neural tube right there along the midline at the back with its underlying notochord. And then the 2 layers of endoderm roll into the middle and meet. And this stuffing, the red layer, actually splits kind of into 2 different layers. One of them stays peeled onto the endoderm, like that, and the other layer is peeled, or is adhered just under the ectoderm, like that. And we've now got the basic body plan for a human, or in fact any other vertebrate animal, with an outer part of the body that I just call the outer tube, that is, using technical terms, is called the somatic part of our body, and this is the subject for the first semester of Anatomy and Physiology. And then we have an inner tube of the body, which is called the visceral part of the body, or the gut, and it forms the subject for ANP2. Now, to appreciate this, you're going, I don't think my body looks this way. But you have to realize what I'm talking about is the body part of your body, your trunk, as if you didn't have a head, arms, or legs. And if that's the case, then do you see that you have, I know it's not a perfect round tube, but you have an outer tube, right? And what's it made of? Skin, muscle, bones, right? Ribs, okay? And going down the middle, what's the inner tube? The gut, right? Your digestive tract. It's where the food goes in at the head end and comes out at the tail end. And so, you know, we can extend this thing back into our magic 3 dimensions and sort of appreciate that. If we've got this, what would now be an embryo if we're talking about, and you know, I do a whole thing with my students to kind of give them that perspective as well. But you've got an embryo with now a forming, still no spinal cord or brain, but you've got this elaborating neural tube running down the back of the embryo with its notochord, which is eventually going to get filled in with bone to form the solid vertebral, bony vertebrae along there. And so this gets filled in with bone, little chunks of bone all along here, and there's a whole process by which that happens. And then running down the middle, which, you know, I'll dot it in because we wouldn't be able to see it. You've got that gut tube or digestive tract, you know, and then that's when everybody goes, oh my God, this class is going to be weird. Where the gut tube meets the inner tube meets the outer tube at the tail end would be the anus, and everybody goes, oh my God, he said that word, I can't believe it. And now we have the basic body plan for a vertebrate, or for a human, as a representative of any vertebrate animal. And with the Windows logo periodically flashing on it. I don't know what that means. But the point is this, and there's not a single A&P text that gives you this perspective from the start. And when I sat there in that anatomy class as a graduate student, nobody else had ever given me that perspective, and I went, oh my goodness, I know absolutely all of that, but I've never seen it put together that way, and I've never understood it in a way that makes sense. And the problem is, and the capacity that to this day my mentor had, is to take a step back and go, before we start talking about the details of the cells in the skin and all this, let's make a big picture. And it's not only that the texts don't start that way. When you start getting into every single chapter of the text, they begin with this bullet point list of details that's just trying to solve some technological problem. How do we explain the details of how this particular part of the body works, when I think, at the level that, at least that we're encountering our students on their way into those careers, what we want to give them is more a big picture. And we do that, I think. And we do it because that's what inspires us, and that's how we try to organize all of this for our students. But the text doesn't. And so it really doesn't solve, or it doesn't accompany us, I think, in the question of what inspires us in our teaching. And so, you know, to my mind, maybe that's the place to start, and then think about the text as a supplement or a reference or an encyclopedic piece or something like that.
As a follow-up, because you always start your AP1 with this, which is not traditionally presented in the textbook, so it's always interesting when he does that, because when I teach AP2, that's what we always end the semester on, so it ends up piecing together quite nicely. So with student focus on all of these, we always do reproductive and development at the end, and so then we teach, so it does be presented, but it's more as a part of sperm and egg getting together and how the development goes, so it is kind of funny, because we always start and end and we try at the same point.
Yeah, and there is a full circle that way. It's a nice bookends to the course and all of that. And you know, I mean, from here we go on, and you know, it gets them ready for even just for dissecting and cutting into it. Whether it's the human, we use fetal pigs or human cadaver. You know, I even usually do my little. You know, next class, this is going to be you. And here's your little. And this is when I tell them, you know, you're going to have to draw a lot during this course, but don't worry. There'll be no reason that you have to worry about the quality of your drawings, but that's you cutting into this, doing, you know, the classic dissection of cutting into what we call the body cavity, and the embryo we call this the coelom. And, you know, when you're talking about major surgery, most of the time, whether it's chest surgery, abdominal surgery, that's the same thing. You're cutting into this space. opening up the outer tube so that you can expose the inner tube, which of course now is being elaborated into a stomach, intestines, a pancreas, a liver coming off of that, you know, lungs coming into the chest cavity and all of that. But this basic plan is there, and then they can see that and appreciate it. And we even go in, you know, I could go on and on, but that's not the point of the workshop. But, you know, that space is really interesting. That space is a sacred space. It's fascinating how it has, both in a medical perspective and in most cultures, don't ever want to get into that space if they don't need to, right? And we have a very good medical reason for that, which is because when we first started doing that, everybody died, right? The first time of surgery, because nobody had thought about
Washing their hands.
yeah, and of course the solution, it was actually, well, Florence Nightingale really pushed it, but before her it was, come on nurses, help me out, Claire, wasn't it, the nurses figured it out though, Florence Nightingale, but it was also the Civil War nurse, Claire.
Well, that was Claire Barton,
Claire Barton.
they exchanged letters and talked
Yeah,
about this.
so, but I think she was actually more like the one who put together that you need antiseptic paint.
Yeah, but
But
Florence
it
was
took-
also environmental, open the windows and let those bad microbes out.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
seeing
fresh air, good food.
Anyways, you know, that was, I mean, you talk about the, you know, one of the incredible contributions from nursing, because the doctors were too dumb to think about washing their hands, the nurses said so. So anyways, so,
No, was the OB doc.
Yeah.
Semmelweis, yeah.
oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Childbirth fever.
So when they're talking,
Then he got
then
the operation,
you know,
they
wide
wash
out.
their hands.
Yeah.
it'll be very
So-
exciting. Very.
So, you know, before we get into the
This will be
details of the
interesting.
textbook,
It's going to be
I would love to hear, you know, or at least to have you folks maybe find somebody else and take 5 or 10 minutes and find what is that, what are there one of those moments that really inspired you, you know, to love this topic? And then we can think about what we look for in the textbook. Is that
It's just going to be hard shooting this.
okay? In fact, there's perfect pairs here. Have at it.
Characterization,
Can we go on?
chapters, titles, dialogues.
What do folks want to? Is there anybody who really wants to just tell us their whole story? Or, I guess, you know, where I think we're trying to go with this is the question of what those real inspirations that move us in our subject matter, well, where does that come out when we're faced with adopting a textbook? And do all of you use textbooks? So,
$1,000.
Yeah.
so maybe we can just throw out some ideas, and then we can show you the examples from our situation, which we can show you a part of it. Because to be honest, I mean, if I would have needed more than one hand truck to really bring everything, that we could possibly, between desk copy, and that's the print stuff, and then online is like double, so, from all the publishers. Anyways, but maybe, rather than just say, well, these are the important factors, what does inspire you in your teaching, and is there ever a connection with a factor in adopting a text? I think that's what interests me. So, ideas there? You know,
I think with a lot of texts, like what you were saying for the biology, is definitely true in the math area. And most of them are just, you know, either reference stuff with a lot of bullet point material, or they're just recipe books as to how to solve this, that, and the other thing. And so it's hard to have anything that you know, with what you talked about or what we talked about in our group, of those inspiring things of seeing the big picture, because there's really not much of that in textbooks. And so that's one of the hard things about textbooks, is they really don't have that big picture piece to it. And so you end up going, I think, when you're looking at factors of adopting textbooks, to other things like what's the cost to the student, what is the value to the student as far as what they're able to pull out of it. What's there as a help for an adjunct instructor who comes in and doesn't have a lot of time outside of class to be putting into, you know, really pulling a lot of neat stuff into the class, they need something that's a great reference for them as well to help organize the material in a good way. And then you also get, you know, if you've got a hybrid class or an online class, you want to have some of those materials that are available to help that hybrid or online class be as robust as possible. So I think all of those things, from just my perspective, play a factor in what you do in adopting textbooks. You have to go to those other ones because the other piece typically isn't there.
Yeah, like you say. I find I disagree with the textbooks quite a lot. That, as far as I'm concerned, they're wrong.
Do you have an example of that? And I apologize because I think we were going to try and find out who everyone is, so let's do it. So that was
Dean Holbrook, I teach math.
You want us to do it as we hear from folks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I'm Susanna Mucci, psychology.
psychology. Yeah, psychology I find is especially interesting.
I wrote a book because I've been a practicing therapist for a long time, so I just wrote one that I use for my family systems
A
class.
textbook?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Great.
And it has everything I want in it.
Uh-huh.
How nice.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
perfect. And it's cheap.
Uh-huh.
Cheap is the main thing. My students suffer so much, so I would say anything cheap, and then I just disagree with the books, and I just tell them not to read certain parts. Everything's presented black and white. Motivation, it's a thing, black and
And
white.
so what inspired you to write your book, or what was it?
Do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. To get the information out there to my students
Or was it to
in a
put some
way
of
that
your-
can be palatable.
Was it to put some of your things that inspired you and that you really value all in one place?
And ways of, especially for the family systems class, looking at the family of origin is very, you have to go inward, so I did, yeah, they signed a suicide clause before we take the class. Just kidding.
How about yours, kids?
My name's Tom Krasinski. I teach digital photography. What inspires me? Good work inspires me in my textbook selections, which some of my textbook selections have to change every 18 months because we follow Photoshop, and Photoshop, they come out with upgrades every about 18 months. So we have to, not only if we're teaching Photoshop, have new textbooks every 18 months, but they cycle so slowly that right now, CS5 just came out, we may or may not have a textbook for the fall. So there's that thing, but about inspiring me, I look for textbooks that the imagery is good, and I find that people who write textbooks about photography aren't very good photographers. We just used a book, and it's a Michael Freeman book, and he apparently has some love of everything Asian. So much of his stuff is, Thai monks and Japanese, and so it's like, and I have students of mine that were just absolutely turned off because the imagery was so poor. It was like he took a trip, took some pictures, and went, why don't I just do a book?
Yeah.
So,
Tax write-off.
so what a perfect thing. I mean, the information was good, but the imagery didn't back up the information. So what inspires me is good photographs that go with a good
Yeah.
book.
Well, that follows through with anatomy too. You can't sort of see the body parts either without having really bad drawings. I've actually found in some of the things I've been doing now is look back at the old Grey's Anatomy and so inspired by that person because you think, this guy actually did way better drawings than some of the people now and sort of back then. Just look at some of them. So it is, but the imagery is key, especially for part of our
Nancy Goff-Leibel. I teach medical terminology and then work in the skills lab in nursing. And for medical terminology, we've had the same text for a number of years, actually. And the thing about it is that it's a workbook also, and it forces the students to break down the words and not try to memorize them straight off, which would be fruitless. So I think it's really effective that way. The anatomy parts, though, we kind of course, dovetail a little bit with A&P. And they're, going on YouTube and stuff to get that to come alive is good. But the pictures, the drawings, photographs in the text are very good too. So we've, every semester they try to get us to use different ones, but it's been very good. And it is used for 2 courses, so it's a deal. Yeah, medical terminology 1 and 2 uses the same book, and that, because it is a workbook book, I think it is pretty effective. Yeah.
Rosemary Teeny, and I teach nursing and pharmacology. The one thing that I find with the textbooks is, like, we have a new edition, and I'm lecturing about drugs and pharmacology, and okay, see that one exuberant, that one's off the market. See this one, that one's off the market. This one, there's a new one now that has replaced Ceravent, and it's called, they're never up to date. So I have them reference like the FDA websites and things like that to what meds are available. And I use a lot of journals too. Yeah, and YouTubes.
I'm just saying these are things people mention. So.
Well, I'm Eileen Cotter. I also teach nursing, but I teach fundamentals, the very beginning, and the fundamentals itself can be very dry. We cover a lot of legal, ethical, all that kind of stuff, which can be very dry. And, I've looked at a number of different textbooks. Now, for fundamentals, they all kind of cover the same thing. And what I find is in the class, as the instructor, you have to make it real. Because when you read about it, it is okay. But as the instructor, I have to take that information and make it real for them. What really happens to your patient? What really can occur from here? And so that part of it is so much my role to make it real for them.
So it'd be hard to find a textbook that would sort of accommodate. Your textbook sounds like it
Right.
would be like what we do.
Because it's
is
very factual.
It's a reference for the facts, but it's not conveying your message in the class to make it tangible to them. So I can see where you have a difficult time picking and liking a textbook.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I've looked at a number of textbooks out there, and the chapters are the same, and it's basic information that you need, the basics that you need to get it started, and then the other ones take a while. Everywhere else, but, yeah.
That's where Thatcher had a class this summer, but he just told me it was canceled. But that's where I think in your case, where he was talking about making wikis and things, which I'm not very good at, that Larry's great at, where if you had something for your class and you had your class information, even if you had a textbook that had all the information they needed as far as facts and as a resource, which they would need in order to have the accurate perspective of the legal jargon associated with things, but then each chapter would have your perspective for them to relate, so at least they get their book, and then they'd have the chapter they're reading, but then how it relates to patients and your patient scenario would be something that you could provide as a, and then maybe evolve, and then after a few years that would evolve into a textbook unto itself. Write a book. So you just have to do it, you have to do what she did. Make the one that works for you.
Hi, I'm Selena Bliss. Whereas Eileen gets them in first semester, I get them in their final semester. And I like what you do, you come full circle. One of my important duties is the final semester is to make connections to previously learned material. So we get those aha moments, whereas I don't know if you get so many of those. You get the groans, I get the, oh, now I understand. So that's what inspires me to stay in the last semester. This is in my 16th year, our third textbook. I believe it's the best. We depend heavily on textbooks in nursing because when our graduates graduate, they take their licensure exam. And I've written questions for the licensure exam, and every question has to be tied to 2 nursing textbooks. Because we're evidence-based practice, everything we do is based on what's out there in the research. So we have to have those connections. Therefore, our tests are all connected back to the textbook. So when the student says, well, that's not what I'm seeing, or that's not what I would have thought, we tell them, what does the book tell you? So we're always sending them back to the book. One of our greatest challenges is making the book come alive and correcting it. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of errors in our textbooks, but when we do, we get really excited. We love to catch errors because the students will question this and they'll say, that doesn't look right. And I'll say, let's write the publisher. And I think in my 16 years here, I've had students catch maybe 3 or 4 errors, and those publishers will write you right back. And it's very empowering to the students, so they love it because they're like, yeah, we caught them, we had to change. Well, I hate to admit this, factors in adopting a text, when it came to the bottom line, we had to go with the lowest reading level. That was our determining factor. Our students are reading less and less. Their reading comprehension is lower and lower. We compare and contrast all the nursing textbooks, and ours is at a 10.5 grade reading level. It was the lowest we could get. Is it 10.5? We weren't on 11.5, and students were admitting, I don't understand what they're saying. And we are finally tip of the iceberg, but it started 3 semesters ago. We had a student that failed at the end, and when we evaluated what happened, she never bought the book. She was an auditory learner and was able to pass her exams based on the auditory, the lectures, up to a point, and that was her stop point. So we're seeing more and more students not reading. The big thing for us right now in picking out textbooks, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is what's the supplemental materials. You're doing all these figures. Elsevier now has animations that we can link to our PowerPoint or just show in class.
Do you use Elsevier?
Yeah.
Because that's my favorite textbook that we could not get hold of them to get their online resources. They were so rude, and the rep that I spoke with before was
Our rep comes and sees us all the time.
I've had such a bad experience with it, but they're my favorite textbooks. When I saw them, I'm like, I love this textbook.
They seem to be the
It's a
powerhouse
hard
with the
time.
supplemental materials. They just developed a product called Page Burst. I was just telling Lily, I haven't even opened the CD yet. But they have a lot of online supplemental materials. We're using animations. What else? Rosemary, you're usually ahead of everyone. What's out there? I just haven't had a chance to look at that new stuff.
I think that the student supplementals, I've heard a lot this semester, going into Elsevier and finding,
And they're telling us about.
yeah, finding case studies and things that make it,
Videos.
make it real
Yeah,
for
make
them.
it real.
And the NCLEX questions and stuff.
Yeah, so it'll be supplemental materials is a huge consideration. And rep support. Ours is Christina Delord. She's up here every semester. You call her, email her, she's right back with you the same day. She's in Phoenix.
Yeah, they were really hard to, and hard to anything.
And you can we send our rep an email and say, something's wrong with the system, and she's right on it. We have tech support.
I'm Barb Davis.
Finally, we get
I'm,
some humanities here.
Yes, English for a long time, and I do kind of a mix-up between online and on-ground. For instance, for Women in Literature, which is English 237, I make a hybrid, which is just an anthology of the literature that I have selected after however many years I've been teaching, a long time. That I have selected to teach specific goals for the class. It's not all wonderful literature, not everybody loves it, but it points to what our objectives and learning outcomes are for the class. Unfortunately, when I first created that course packet, it was about 80 hours of work, and it's about 70 pages long, probably maybe a little bit more than that. And it was $19 by Desktop Publishing, which is now Premier. Is it Premier?
Premium source.
Premium Source, that's right. And their price for this summer that they bid to me was $53 a copy. And basically it's just a Xeroxed copy of the materials that I sent them, and they got copyright.
But then
permission
they
to
get,
use.
like, So a couple cents per page, per student, per semester on it.
Yeah.
The book stuff is
And-
20%.
And this,
And then
so
you
I
have-
just went back to using an old edition of that book. Where it's current, Norton Anthology is currently in its 3rd edition, and it's $140 to buy it new. And so I just stayed with the 2nd edition, and I sent an email out to them yesterday, and in Matt's workshop yesterday, I found the book that I use, page numbers in, on my syllabus for 25 cents. And then it was what, $3.75 shipping and handling. And, any way that I can get them to beat the system, and we're supposed to do that now. The board has given us a directive that we're supposed to make it as financially reasonable for our students as we possibly can. And I've done it for years, kind of covertly, but now the board and the campus deans and the division deans are saying, go for it, because the board wants to.
Because we used to get in trouble, we used to say
No
you
more.
can't tell anybody because
No
you're
more.
still in on campus and you're not allowed to tell people they don't go to Amazon.
I took this
Oh,
from the
no.
store.
That's because that's the way the bookstore contract used to be.
Okay, so we're out of that.
Yeah,
The
I give all-
contract
I
with the
give all
bookstore
my
is up
ISBN
September
numbers
1,
out.
and we gave them an extension last year, but they're gonna have to figure out supply and demand at some point, and lower their prices.
You have to believe their market has to be,
It's 35%.
but their market, I think our students who get a stipend for their books and don't care how much they pay. Because I think anybody who cares how much you pay
Right, it's
is
gonna go.
gonna, increasingly. And there's gonna be a few people, some people who still just convenience is gonna be out, but more.
I really agree with what Dean was saying too. The textbooks that I do use, I use primarily as a reference, definitely. A lot of times students don't think it's worth buying because it's not used quite enough. But when I teach online, in the classroom I think we are the textbook, and Susan Lucci's a perfect example of that, and then she ends up writing her own. But for online, I do, for the same classes like English 101 and 102 that I have course packets for, I use a textbook because otherwise I am going to be giving them every bit of information. And technology is beginning to support that, but in the meantime I can say, make sure you read pages 200 through 249.
Faye Moxbottle, I'm in the physical education department, and there is a publisher out there, it's called Human Kinetics, and I pretty much go with them because I trust them. When I was going to school, they were the premier, people that printed out stuff in our field, and I still feel like they are still the best publishing company for our field. And I do teach online, so for me the textbook is great because the authors create everything. And you can go in, they've got, resources, supplements, everything is out on the textbooks that I use from Human Kinetics. So for me their textbook is tremendous.
One of the things that I was talking with somebody just the other day about was where we were 10 years ago with textbooks and supplements and that sort of thing. And when we were doing, we called it online math, but it was really just correspondence math. They just sent stuff to us and we sent it back. And where the publishers have come with all the stuff that's out there now, our online classes are so robust as to where they were 10 years ago. It's just a night and day difference. And most of that is driven by the publishers just because of what they have put together to kind of help support that type of environment for learning. So if you just think back 10 years ago where we were with supplements, and there wasn't any of that stuff. There may have been a solution guide in a math course, maybe, and that was about it,
My name is Ronnie Ramos. I teach welding at CTEC. And I don't know, like I was telling him earlier, they need the books because they have to read, especially if they want to go on to be professional welders, I guess you'd say. the way we have it now, I have to go into every booth and find out where they're at. If they're just a beginner, never welded before, and I got a guy up here that's welded before, I have to go in there and tell him, well, why are you running the machine so hot? This is what the book says, the video says. And I tell them, you seem to forget, these guys are professionals that put these videos out. And I have to tell them, well, you want to tell the machine, you can control it here. And then when you get to welding, then you move your amperage up. Don't put it up to 50 amps at a time, put 5 or 10 as you're going, you know. And then they say, well, how come the weld keep coming down on me? I look at the machine and, oh man, how can you got it too hot? But the book says, and I have to tell them, well, don't listen to the book.
Back to the
You've got reality in front of you.
But I got a chance to go. My problem is I like to help the kids and help them out as much as I can. And I go into the booth at least 2 or 3 times a day or at night, and I explain to them. Some kids, you can explain to them. They tell them to read this and read that, and then, well, I still can't get it. And I have to come down into layman's terms to let them know what they're doing wrong. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should just sit over here. You bring me the projects that you're doing. I'll tell you what you're doing wrong. I'll go back into your booth. But I can't. I just can't. I gotta.
It's that reading level thing. That's something I was talking about. Did the publishers give you that, or do you have it analyzed?
They give us a one-sheet paper with the major players, 5 or 6 of them, and they compare and contrast, and that's right at the top, the reading level.
Who gives you that?
The publishers.
Oh, really?
They all have to report their reading level.
I still have my welding book, I've never opened it.
See, she was in the real world.
Okay.
It was so hard to read.
I'm glad I took Matt's class, because the big book that we have to buy for the class, now these are guys that are going to get the degree and all that. It's $148. And then each class has 2 or 3 little books. It costs $35 a piece. Man, well, how come it's costing me so much? Every time I go to class, I have to have so many books.
Costs more than the class.
Yeah. And I'm glad I took his class, though, because I'm now going to tell them where they can get the books cheaper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I also said, are we going to get in trouble with school? But no, I guess we can now. Tell them where to get their books.
We heard it from we heard it last, recently from the vice president. We've got Dean here, the division dean, and we've got the faculty president. I guess not anymore.
I took 12 classes at Cal State San Bernardino, and it cost me $300 for the books.
Because in A and B, I would look at that same thing. We could, if we give them 2 editions past, this thing that costs, what are they at?
200.
Over 200?
Oh, dear.
It's not, sometimes they are 25 cents. I mean, that's maybe a little further back, but $20.
No, I've got an 87-cent textbook, paperback, from 1986. It's great.
Should we, do you want to look? Should we take a break and you all can look at, or do we want to do some more?
I think it sounds like they want to. That sounds like the discussion now goes to the resources that go with text and some maybe some of the considerations, but also that would also lead to Matt of what's available as far as perhaps renting, whether it's a main textbooks or how much of the supplemental versus, because my aspect was some of the online components that come with the textbooks. You have to buy the new one to get the password, but some of them have just a minimal fee to get on them. But how many of those would be available?
Miserable for the students. They can't work it, and I can't.
And some of them are, and some of the books are definitely better than others in terms of what the resources are. But it might be nice to hear from Matt in terms of what to rent, and then how much of the supplemental material, because then that's what the reps are really selling them on. Like all the books always say about the same thing.